Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's been fascinating sitting up here listening to some of the sidebars. I hated to interrupt the conversation. I will call the 134th Commission meeting of the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations to order. The chair detects a quorum, and I'll dispense with the calling of the roll. And we're going to move to approval of the minutes, but we do have a number of you have been reappointed, and we'll go over that in a minute, but we have two people in attendance today who are either new appointees or relatively new and here for the first meeting. And I'll start with Christy Gibbs to my right here from Nashville, is joining us. Welcome. Happy to have you. And also Russell Moore here to my left is here from the Comptroller's office, sitting in the seat that Phil Doss sat in so well for so many years. And have you prepared your remarks?
I'll have to improv a bit, but I'm glad to be in this seat. I'm glad to be here at TACIR. I've already said hello to several people. Hope to say hello to others. I've been with the Comptroller's office for a while. Phil Doss retired at the end of June. And so I'm the new director of OREA in the Comptroller's office, and look forward to sitting in on TACIR and getting to know everyone better.
Fantastic. Thank you. We're happy to have you. And Ms. Gibbs, I didn't want you to think I had discriminated against you in any way. I always picked on Phil Doss, you see. The rest of them up here know. And I could never get Doss to say even half of what Mr. Moore just said. So he passed, he got an A. But having done that, it might be nice to actually hear from you. I've welcomed you and
Thanks a lot. Well, like you said, I live in Nashville. I am a stay-at-home mom currently, but have had a past political life. Worked for the Bush administration post-college in Washington, D.C., in the President's West Wing. This was for President Bush. And then worked for both Senator Bill Frist, Ralph Davis at Cressy & Company. And following that, worked for the Governor Haslam's campaign and his administration, where I was Chrissy Haslam's chief of staff. So back in familiar territory, but
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, we're delighted to have you. We
Thank
remember you from your last assignment, and it's good to have you here. Kind of makes us wonder who's at home today if you're not staying at home and you're here. But thank you for your willingness to serve. I think you'll enjoy your tenure here. The first order of business officially then is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Properly moved and seconded. Any questions or changes, discussion on that? All in favor then signify by saying aye. Any opposed or abstaining? All right, those minutes are duly approved. And behind tab 2, even though I sort of got into parts of this with our new members, I'll recognize Ms. Roehrich-Patrick for updates on staff and otherwise.
Well, first we want to welcome all of our returning reappointees. We're delighted to have you all back, as well as having Ms. Gibbs here for the first time. And Russell, happy to have you on board here. I guess OREA is going to be our tradition for appointments, and that's a great place to have someone come here from. The next thing I want to do is introduce Mark Patterson to you. Mark, would you please stand? Mark has joined our staff as the Information Systems Technical Manager. He is going to be taking Janet Steen's place. And Mark has a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of South Florida and an associate's degree in business administration and information systems management. And he has taken every technology class at Nashville State and taught most of them. Mark and I go way back to the governor's budget office under McWhirter. Mark's background is in accounting, but he is a genius when it comes to technology. I could not be happier to have him join our staff. He's going to be wonderful. He has most recently worked for Metro and did a lot of their really cool online stuff, as well as some behind-the-scenes things in databases. So welcome, Mark. And next, I want to congratulate Matt Owen and Jennifer Berry. Would you both please stand? Have we got both of you in here? I saw Jennifer out in the hall. Matt? You know Matt. You know Jennifer. We promoted them to senior research associates, and they have some big tasks for this upcoming year. There's Jennifer. They have some big tasks in this upcoming year, which are on the list of things that we'll go over tomorrow afternoon when we look at the timeline. Thanks, guys. And then also, we want to recognize Ms. April Scavali, our office manager, who has attained 10 years of service with the state of Tennessee. And April, if you'll come up here, we would like to take your picture. And while she's coming up, just please join me in congratulating all of these folks.
How should we do this?
We'll just move the chair this way. These chairs don't roll well.
This is the ceremonial.
Okay.
You hold. Okay, let me get one more. Yeah, you want to shake hands again?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
That's so funny. April has that's her 10 years of service with the state, but she's been with us at TACIR for about 8 months. I'm doing that from the top of my head, but not 10 years with TACIR. Thanks, April.
Okay, now we are ready for Dr. Ton.
Dr. Ton, behind tab 3. Here we go. We're moving on, and we're ready for you to make your presentation on the best practices report. Let's make sure we're.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm a professor at the University of Tennessee, and this project was funded by TACIR to the Baker Center of Public Policy at UT, and I appreciate the support to do this project. So we had kind of an open-ended task to look around the world, what is happening not only in Tennessee but other states and maybe other countries related to best practices, helping communities become more sustainable. I think I'm not going to go into the details of the report. You can do that. There's lots and lots of details in the report, but I'm trying to keep this at a higher level. And I think that if I look at all the chapters that we wrote, an overarching theme is design. That there are all kinds of new ideas that are being developed, and innovations happening around the state and around the world. And if you have a problem, maybe there is a really unique design solution that can be found to a particular problem. So I'll talk about some trends that motivated our writing, briefly go through the report topics, and then have some conclusions. So there's a really interesting book, a new book called No Ordinary Disruption. It's written by 3 principals from McKinsey & Company. They talk about the upcoming world as will not be like the world that you know today. There are 4 real major trends that are impacting the world. One is aging population. A second is urbanization. A third is global flows of everything, not only just commerce, but information, money, and so on. And the fourth is technology. If you look at the image on the right-hand side, there are people, not only in the United States, but around the world, whose job is to disrupt markets with new products. And, of course, when they do that, it's maybe better for our consumers, better for our companies, but it poses challenges to people in public service like ourselves. So this image is from the MIT Technology Review, and they definitely train people, and their job is to go out and totally disrupt the markets that they work in. So that can be an opportunity for new technologies and also a challenge. This second trend that they mention in the book is urbanization, and I think that impacts Tennessee in that the rural communities are suffering from population decline, trying to keep their young people, and they're attracted to cities, and cities like Shanghai, even cities like Mexico City, and you wonder why that's the issue. And in the United States, smaller cities such as Austin and Fargo are also attracting population from rural areas. And so some of the chapters in this report get to the issue of how can we improve things in the rural communities so that people want to stay there and prosper. So putting the pieces together, 4 sub-themes from the report. Make maximum use of the opportunities of technology writ large, and it's not just expensive technologies, not necessarily high technologies, but also affordable technologies as well. try to implement ideas to help build rural and urban social, cultural, political, and natural capital, find innovative ways to pay for things, and that's, as you guys know, that's a tough nut to crack. And then how do you put those pieces together to imagine new futures? So, and I'm not going through the report through the chapters as they're written, but to kind of follow the presentation of this outline of this presentation. So, one chapter focuses on wastewater, and some good examples of what's happening in the United States with the various wastewater treatment plants. But the message here is that if you look at these solutions, they're design-oriented. You can design a wastewater treatment plant that can inject water to keep salt water from coming into your drinking water reserves in California. You can design, if you have land, you can design plants that use natural processes to process wastewater. And there's all kinds of different designs that one can imagine depending on your situation and your goals for your community. Energy efficiency, renewable energy, the major topics these days. No lack of innovation in the energy efficiency area with respect to energy efficient lights, automobiles, air conditioners, furnaces, and so on. Renewable energy, solar, PV, wind, geothermal, for example, lots of advances taking place there. A couple of advances are innovative ways of financing energy efficiency through energy service companies and performance contracting. There's low-cost technologies that are being developed around the world, and I'll get to that in the next slide. And an interesting design issue is the utility of the future with new smart metering, smart grid technology. How can you design those utilities of the future to meet the needs of your community? Maybe meet more goals than just energy efficiency and providing electricity for lights, but also maybe there's a health aspect that you can design into the utility of the future. So this chapter was written by a graduate student, and the purpose of the chapter was just to highlight the fact that there are technologies being developed in the United States for developing countries, technologies being developed by social entrepreneurs around the world that are very low cost, that are implemented in developing countries. Now, so one on the left is a terracotta cooling device. The one on the right was developed by the Stanford Design School, a $100 compost latrine. On the bottom right, we have the $100 laptop computer that is totally indestructible, open source computer. And then a couple of devices that, if you shake them around, they produce electricity. Not that these particular technologies would be useful or applicable or adoptable in Tennessee or elsewhere in the United States, but these are representative of low-cost technologies that can be redesigned for application here in the United States. And there are thousands of these technologies out there, and I hope that our report have done a better job of cataloging these technologies, but we didn't. Okay. So getting to the issue of social capital in rural communities, there's lots of things you can do. Local food sufficiency is an important topic. Lots of things that can be done. With respect to food hubs, for example, the image on the lower left-hand corner is an image of agritourism. In the middle on the bottom is an image of a food kitchen. Lots of things that can be done in rural communities on local food self-sufficiency. The image on the right-hand side is a vertical farm. So there's things you can do, innovative things you can do in urban areas as well. These are not proliferating around the world, but people have an image of a high, like a 30-story building in New York City, 30-story building here in Nashville, that can grow enough food for tens of thousands of people in a very compact manner. So lots of innovations that one can think of if you think of design. Rural community preservation, Dr. Tim Mazzell wrote this chapter, and I thought he did a really good job of ferreting out lots and lots of good ideas related to this. Two things that stood out for me from that chapter. One is extraordinary projects, and two that he highlighted in Tennessee were the Port of Kate's Landing on the Mississippi River, and in West Tennessee, and also Discovery Park. Really cool ideas that are bringing people in, jobs, and so on. And on the other hand, there's numerous small-scale things that can be done with respect to supporting new businesses and entrepreneurs. This is an image of of a device that would actually print a house made out of concrete in rural areas, a low-cost house that is much more sustainable and resilient than a mobile home, for example. So new ideas. Innovative public finance. Dr. Zell wrote this chapter as well. He found some good ideas, but I think he was maybe somewhat sanguine on the ability of some of these ideas to provide new ideas for innovative public finance. But, for example, crowdfunding is a new and cool thing with places like Kickstarter, websites like Kickstarter, but maybe not a good source of funding for ongoing government operations. He looked at revolving loan funds. And they seem to work okay, but they do hemorrhage funding and always need to be replenished, so that may be not a totally sustainable solution. So this idea here...
Excuse me, Doctor.
Yes.
I apologize for just jumping in on you. We do that sometimes. Tell us more about crowdsourcing.
Okay.
What is that?
So let's say you had an idea that you wanted fund. Let's say you had an idea for a public park or a play set or gymnasium or something you want to do in your community. You can find a crowdsource website, and you would develop a little proposal, a description of what you want to do, post it on that site, and people who want to support you would actually go to the website and pledge money. And if you get up to a certain, if you meet your goal, then the people who pledged will pay you. And if you don't meet your goal, then the pledges go away and people pledge other things.
Is something you could use as an alternative to the gas tax, for example, if you. We're looking for alternatives. I mean, we got to do something with this. Okay, all right. And did you, in the course of doing any of this, all kidding aside, look at it at what do they call them? Social impact? Social? Are they on here?
That's next.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
This is just helping you segue.
Thank you. And I haven't even met you, so that was good. So on one of my other jobs, I work at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and I am managing DOE's evaluation of its weatherization assistance program. And in one of our case study visits, we stopped at the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative in Baltimore, Maryland, and met Ruth Ann Norton, who runs the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, which is a program that brings together funds to weatherize and put healthy homes measures into homes. Lots of energy savings benefits and lots of health benefits as well. She also used to work on Wall Street, and she's a big proponent of pay-for-success social impact bonds. Now, I guess I'll point one way or the other. It's easily explained, but not necessarily easily implemented way to fund projects. So you start with a vulnerable population that a program needs funding or maybe some innovative thinking. You go out to the investment community. In this case, they lined up the Calvert Foundation and Goldman Sachs, among other private sector investors. They put money up. They buy social impact bonds. Those bonds are pay for the activities for the implementation of the program by nonprofits such as GHHI. The people who pay back the bonds, in this case, is the Johns Hopkins Medical System. Now, the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, they put enough measures into homes to where they will get measurable medical savings from reduced asthma. So fewer kids going to the emergency room, fewer kids going to the hospital, and every one of those that are prevented saves thousands of dollars. So the Johns Hopkins Medical System says, all right, if you put these measures in homes, and if you save us money, we will pay those investors back. And those investors are expecting an 8 to 12% return on their investment. Now, in this case, since it's fairly new, this is still a new deal. I mean, only really first deal happened in the United Kingdom back in 2010. So they lined up a group of foundations, philanthropic foundations, to guarantee paying back those funds to the private sector investors. And so they have the Kresge Foundation, the Robert Wood Foundation, among others, to guarantee those paying back those investors. We had Ruth Ann out at Knoxville on August 19th. This is her model, presented this model. And we know that Memphis is also pursuing, and probably much farther along than Knoxville is along this area. But I'm certainly happy to take questions about social impact bonds.
I didn't know whether any of the members had begun to hear about these or focus on these, but I'm I haven't read any proposals yet, but I am hearing that we're going to be presented with something along these lines from whether it's Knoxville or Memphis. I don't know, but it's.
I think Memphis is much farther along. We just had a meeting. We got the community together to see if they're behind the idea, and now we're working on a proposal to the Trinity Foundation to collect the evidence, as to how much money would be saved for the UT medical system, for example, or Covenant Medical from these kinds of programs.
Okay.
Back to rural communities. One of our other graduate students, Kayla Stover, a graduate student in sociology, wrote this chapter, and I think did a really good job of identifying a lot of approaches that can help communities improve their social capital, improve their decision making, including study circles and scenario planning, community halls, and I think of communities that I can imagine communities that implement a fair number of these things are very vibrant democratic communities. And the last chapter, I take responsibility for this, either the blame or the praise for this. I'm also something of a futurist, and I had to throw something into the report along those lines. And I'm also a planner and policy person. And in these community situations, people talk about sustainability all the time. They talk about resilience and adaptability, and even learning communities is a new thing that's coming along. What if you combined all those goals and combined achieving those goals with computing technologies and big data, from IBM and so on, intelligent systems? What would you get? You get a community that I think is more aware. People are more aware of how they're using energy, how they're using water, how they're meeting sustainability goals, for example. I think they'd be more proactive to deal with threats from extreme weather events or changes in energy prices, for example. They have principles to work off of, those 4 principles. And I think, using technology and using some of the empowerment ideas that we mentioned before, they might be able to work together better. So conclusions, I think that this idea of sentient communities ties together a lot of the design principles we talked about. But it may be that these guys that are working on disrupting our lives, maybe they have something there. Maybe new ideas, design principles that can be used to help move things along with respect to sustainability and rural empowerment. So, that's my presentation.
Questions for Dr. Tan? Doctor, I noticed that the governor just recently appointed another task force on rural. I think it's called the Rural Task Force. If you were called upon, would you have ideas to suggest there's a rural section here, for example, in this report? It's just the kind of thing in terms of what we do with this and your knowledge.
Sure. Well, my team, Tim Mazel's done a lot of work, and I've done a lot of work in rural communities. I know that Isla McMahon, we cut our teeth working in places like Cock County, where we brought our planning classes to work sustainability issues in distressed counties, and Cock County hosted us at least 3 times, I think. So that was great. And Tim Mazel as well. Yeah. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Tan knows of what he's speaking when it comes to the rural community, and I believe that that it would be good to have a conversation with the new rural task force. I think that is something that would be welcomed by the task force. Not speaking for the task force, I'm not on it, but I think that it would be really good. But they have done incredible work, and I just want to say, after cutting your teeth in Cock County, it's nice to see you're still in the business, and they can go on to something else, because that was not the easiest challenge in the whole world. But we really appreciate all the work you did over in Cock and around East Tennessee.
Appreciate your hospitality.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all.
You bet. Mayor Rowland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Tan, as you talk about the exodus from the rural areas, and you mentioned technology, what about high-speed internet? Is that one of the reasons? Would that be?
That they're leaving rural?
Yes. The lack of.
The lack of, but maybe the draw of, there's more technology excitement in the urban areas. And, I wouldn't say, there's maybe a lack of internet, but I think there's just more socialness. My kids, for example, want to live in large cities rather than in rural areas, and there's this buzz, I guess, and things that they can do, and see in the urban areas that they can't get in the rural areas, and it's hard to compete with that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Mayor Burgess, you're thinking about something. You just don't want to share it yet. Well, that's right, and we did just if anybody would like the hard copy, we have it, but online is probably easier to access. All right, anything further for the good doctor? All right, thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
We'll be back in touch. Thank you, appreciate it. All right, moving right along then to tab 4. And Tyler, there you are. Come on up. Tyler Carpenter, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Get this mic right. I'll let them pass out the handouts.
To set this up a little bit, just for the record, I had actually had a phone call from Senator Bell this week, hoping that we would draw our attention to this, and I told him that not only do we have the sort of the summary that we'll get today, but then a very good panel discussion is scheduled for tomorrow about this with a lot of folks that have quite a bit of expertise in here. I see Tim Amos is in the audience today as well, but it is a very important topic and one that has not we really haven't updated our statute on it in nearly a generation, I guess. So having said that, we've got the materials. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the Commission. My name is Tyler Carpenter, and I'll be presenting a memo on the Homestead Exemption in Tennessee bankruptcy, which can be found under tab 4. The memo provides a briefing on our research, which includes the background of the Homestead Exemption in Tennessee and a comparison to other states. The study is required by Public Chapter 326, Acts of 2015, which may be found under Appendix A. I'll be happy to answer any questions along the way, but tomorrow we will have a panel of experts to share their perspectives and to answer any additional questions. In the early 1900s, consumer lending was a personal act based on a good faith guarantee of repayment. As consumer credit began to change in the 1950s and 1960s with the advent of credit cards, these transactions were no longer limited by location. With expanding operations came greater risk for credit lenders, and these companies began feeling constrained by state usury laws, which capped interest rates. And then in 1978, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Marquette National Bank of Minneapolis versus First Omaha Service Corporation that consumer credit agencies may apply interest rates from the state in which they are incorporated. After the Marquette ruling, many states began increasing their usury limits to compete for the business of national lenders. Around that same time, Congress passed the Bankruptcy Reform Act of 1978, which established separate federal bankruptcy courts, created a set of exemptions for debtors, including a homestead exemption, and eased the process of filing for Chapter 13, which is the reorganization and repayment of debt. Until then, Chapter 7, or the liquidation of assets to repay creditors, was the only alternative available to most debtors. I will further discuss these chapters later in the presentation. It's also important to note that the 1978 reform was the largest bankruptcy reform since 1898. There were some reforms between those two dates, but this was like a complete overhaul of the bankruptcy system, which was quite significant. If you look at Exhibit 1 on page 3, you can see the growth in mortgage and consumer debt over the last half century, just to give you kind of an idea of how consumer debt has grown over that time period. So bankruptcy law seeks to promote a balance between the interests of debtors and creditors, being fair to both while allowing a debtor to completely discharge their debt or repay a portion of it based on their ability to pay. Bankruptcy also provides a fresh start for the debtor so they may not become destitute. The Federal Bankruptcy Code, like most states' bankruptcy laws, permits debtors to protect certain property they own from unsecured creditors, which contributes even further to the goal of providing a fresh start. The largest exemption provided by most states is the Homestead exemption. And a comparison of bankruptcy exemptions in Tennessee and at the federal level can be found in Appendix C, which was just handed out to you. It's in that group of papers. So Tennessee's homestead exemption can be traced back to 1852, when the legislature established a maximum exemption of $500. 18 years later, Tennessee's 1870 Constitution increased that exemption to $1,000, where it remained for over 100 years. The 1977 State Constitutional Convention increased the exemption to $5,000, and this time it gave the legislature the ability to increase it further. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. Bankruptcy Reform Act of 1978 established a set of exemptions that included an individual homestead exemption. This exemption was set at $7,500 and was $2,500 more than the state exemption at that time. Joint filers were permitted to double the exemption, bringing the value to $15,000, a total of $10,000 more than Tennessee's state exemption at the time. The reform also gave states the ability to pass legislation restricting residents to state exemptions. Now, reacting to this new federal law, the Tennessee General Assembly enacted Public Chapter 919, Acts of 1980, which restricted Tennessee residents to using only state exemptions, but it did add a $7,500 exemption for joint owners, half the federal amount for joint filers. Although the federal amounts increased with inflation and are now $22,975 for individuals and $45,950 for joint filers, Tennessee's exemptions remain at $5,000 for individuals and $7,500 for joint filers to this day. Recognizing that Tennessee's homestead exemption amounts have fallen well behind, the General Assembly has attempted to increase these amounts at least 13 times in the last 20 years. While several attempts have been made, the Assembly has only successfully created special categories of exemptions for seniors at least 62 years of age or older, and for individuals with one or more minor children. So when we looked at the homestead exemption in each state, we found that most states have higher exemptions than Tennessee. In fact, Tennessee has one of the lowest exemptions in the country for individuals at $5,000, and the lowest exemption for joint filers at $7,500. You'll direct your attention to page 7 and 8. You'll see two maps displaying the individual and joint homestead exemptions for each state. As you can see, in both maps, 31 states have chosen to restrict residents to state exemptions, including Tennessee. On map 1, only 8 of these 31 states, which includes Tennessee, have exemptions with dollar values below the federal amount, and one state, which is Maryland, sets theirs at the federal amount. When we consider allowing the doubling for joint filers, that number increases from 8 to 9 states within the 31 states that have exemptions lower than the federal. Now, these states are represented by the lightest color on the map, and the darkest color being states that offer unlimited exemptions. In an attempt to stay current, 7 states, as well as the federal government, adjust their homestead exemptions periodically to reflect increases in the cost of living. If Tennessee had increased with inflation, we can see on page 9 that the largest increase would be with categories of single and joint, bringing the current value of the single exemption from $5,000 to $16,304, and the joint exemption from $7,500 up to $21,645. As you can see, the value of the single and joint homestead exemptions have eroded in the last 35 years. To see the change in home values over time compared to the Tennessee and federal home values and their exemptions, you can look to Appendix D. That also was in the most recent handout. And information on the frequency and methods of adjusting in each state can be found on Table 1, in Table 1 on page 10. Now, while Maps 1 and 2 represent the individual and joint exemptions offered in each state, there are 14 states that offer at least one enhanced exemption, which include seniors, or enhanced exemptions for seniors, for filers with dependent minor children, for filers with medical debt, and filers with disabilities. And more information on these states and their enhanced exemptions can be found in Table 2 on pages 12 and 13. And the table also shows what the individual and joint exemptions are, and as you can see, their values range from $5,000 for an individual to $500,000 for an individual, and $7,500 to $500,000 for joint filers. The homestead exemption is designed to protect some of the equity that people have in their primary residence. The use of the homestead exemption differs in Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. If an individual files for Chapter 7, which allows debtors to discharge most of their debts, but may require them to give up most of their property, then claiming the exemption may either save the home or provide them with the cash equivalent of the dollar value claimed. If their equity exceeds the exemption, the home may be sold by the trustee. And in Chapter 13 bankruptcy, which allows debtors to repay their debt without liquidating assets, the debtor may claim the homestead exemption in order to reduce the total expected repayment. The home may remain with the debtor unless the home is foreclosed upon. And a brief description of each bankruptcy chapter is available in Appendix B, and a comparison of Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 can be found in Appendix E. And at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Lenise, Ms. Roehrich-Patrick.
I just wanted to make a remark about this. Normally the first thing you see is a draft report with a full-blown description of what we think it is that ought to be done. And in this case, we're starting with background information. I wanted to get that in front of you and give you an opportunity to hear from tomorrow's panel before we, and see what that interaction, what questions that raises before we tried to put that part together for you. So for the October meeting, you'll see your first draft report. The information that you've got in front of you will all be included in that report, and laid over the top of it will be something that looks more like what you're familiar with seeing, that gives us kind of a summary of the issue and where we think it would be most reasonable to go. And then the final report will be brought to you in January for your approval.
It's a little bit of a different approach, and one I sort of like, with the heads up on the front end, because we're actually a little bit more involved in it this way than just having it handed to us as the final work product. Not that we get preliminary drafts, but you can sort of see this as it goes. I'm just dying to know what Tim Amos and the bankers think. You just think there should be no exemption, probably, right? No exemption at all. No, but I mean there does seems to be some consensus that our law needs to be updated, and I hadn't focused on this before, but this will be very interesting, I think. You have questions for? Yes. Mayor Bickers.
I want to thank you I thought you did an excellent job with this report. The one thing I want to clarify is you talk about these exemptions in terms of bankruptcy, but they also exist for those who have a judgment or money damages against them, right?
Correct, yes.
And so, for example, if a drunk driver killed a husband and father of four, he can preserve the equity in his home if he's single up to $5,000 now, and that would be exempt from being used to satisfy the damages that he caused. Would that be correct?
Yes. Were you saying that he killed a family in the accident, or his own family?
He killed the father.
The father, okay.
Or just take any other example where someone, through their tortious conduct, has caused damages. If someone tries to collect for those damages, these exemptions limit what they can collect.
It's my understanding that is correct, that if you were, yeah.
And so, and I'll admit a bias. I've spent more than a quarter century representing business owners when people haven't kept their promise to pay in exchange for goods and services. So, and sometimes it can be challenging, particularly if you get a sophisticated debtor who decides to take advantages of all these exemptions that we have in Tennessee to collect on a judgment that you are successful in obtaining in court. And so I would hope we would not lose sight of the fact that this impacts not just bankruptcies, but it also impacts businesses and others who might be seeking to collect damages that are owed to them.
And actually, so I said yes, but there are certain circumstances depending on what that individual's income is, whether or not they can even qualify for Chapter 7.
Right.
And so if they don't qualify for a Chapter 7, then it only acts to reduce what their total repayment would be. So it really depends on the more details being involved in the situation to make a decision.
Thank you. I also read with interest on page 3 of your report where you write that the most common reason for bankruptcy are medical bills. And it looks like you gathered that from a paper that was authored by now Senator Elizabeth Warren, or co-authored by her when she was a professor of law at Harvard. Did I get the right paper?
I believe that is the correct one. She was one of the authors. There were several, but she was one of the authors.
And when I read that report, I was surprised because they write in here, and this is a study of bankruptcies all across the United States, that 69.1% of these debtors who filed bankruptcy met the definition of medical bankruptcy, and that medical bills was what was driving them into bankruptcy. Was there anything, as you were interviewing people and doing your report, that indicates that would be that the national number of 69% would not be applicable to the state of Tennessee?
What I did find when I was doing the research was that medical debt derived from having medical bills. Sometimes that might mean that you've got all these medical bills coming in and you're actually paying your medical bills, but other things are falling by the wayside. Several reports did corroborate that specific number. We found similar things around that number, but that specific number, these studies are tough to replicate just because of the nature of the way that public records are kept on Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcies. And they're usually,
And least I be suggested that I support Senator Warren. I could find issue with the bias that was in that report, but that was why I was asking whether you found anything that would indicate those numbers were way out of line compared to what would be driving most Tennesseans into bankruptcy.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other question I've got is I did a little research, and it looks like Tennessee leads the nation in bankruptcy filings per capita, right at 1.1 per every 1,000 man, woman, and child, per 1,000 men, women, and children. Georgia's next at 0.95, Alabama's third at 0.81, and Michigan is fourth at 0.66. So Tennessee leads by a significant percentage. Would that suggest that the inadequacy of any homestead exemption or exemptions would not be preventing people from seeking bankruptcy relief in this state?
Well, so when we look at the bankruptcy filing numbers, all we can really look at are what the actual filing rate is. Information on Chapter 7 filings, or closed cases, I should say, is available, and we've looked at that. But as far as Chapter 13 is concerned, that's more difficult to get. And I say that to say that it's my understanding that it's a lot easier to file than it is to finish. And a lot of people are actually, Tennessee also has one of the highest Chapter 13 to Chapter 7 ratios, so more people filing Chapter 13. And we can assume, and it's an assumption, that a lot of these people are moving into Chapter 13 because if they have assets, in order to preserve them, Chapter 13 is a great way to go because you're able to keep your assets, restructure your debt. So to answer your question, it's tough to drill down at what exactly the impact would be, but am I going in the right direction there? I hope I'm able to answer your question.
And this one, my last question, if it's better for me to let the people tomorrow answer it, I'll be happy to do that. I don't want to ask you.
And I'm sure they can. I'm sure they'd be.
But what in your research, what would you suggest is the reason why Tennessee leads the nation in bankruptcy filing rate?
It's tough to say. All I can say is what the data that we've found, and if you looked at that filing rate, you may also notice that some of the highest filing states are mostly southern states. Now, I don't know what causes that, whether or not it's a higher prevalence of poverty or if they're, it's really, I don't know the answer specifically. I think that the people tomorrow will be able to answer that because they've dealt directly with people who have been in that situation. So, great, cool.
Oh, we're in for a treat tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. I can see Bickers of the Old Bailey. It's going to be great. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And along the lines of the mayor, I was thinking along the same lines. When I read this, I wrote a friend of mine who I never did bankruptcy in practice. He's a bankruptcy trustee. I just responded to him and said, may I please make this letter public? And he hasn't responded yet, so I'm going to hold off with giving his name. But he had some very interesting comments about the very things that you raised, Mayor. He mentioned how in the world could you need an increase when we lead the nation. He did say, I would suggest that there is more than adequate protection presently for certain groups, and he names all the groups. And then he says, as to individuals, single folks, married with no children at $5,000 and $7,500, this should be looked at for an increase. In my letter, I specifically asked him how many people are losing their homes in bankruptcy for this would apply, because he doesn't think about the exemption against judgments, as I dealt with frequently as a Sessions Court judge declaring those exemptions. He said that out of his practice of roughly 1,000 cases a year, 2 or 3 homes are affected by our current law. That's incredibly less than I would have thought. So if it's okay, I'll ask you that because this is one man's opinion, does it for a living. But maybe we could ask the people tomorrow, is there some way they could, to me that's incredibly important. How many people are we affecting? What is the problem? What are we fixing? If there is no problem, I don't care to fix it. If there is a problem, then it needs to be. When I got this report and looked at it, I thought, golly, that's way too low. We got to do something about that. And then I get this letter, and we're affecting 2 people a year. So I don't know what to do. So I noticed we had a great group coming tomorrow, very knowledgeable people, but that may not be something they've thought of. If we could tip them so they could have that would be interesting to me. It's a great report. Thank you for your help.
Thank you.
I figured you were just texting with Tim Amos back there because I see he's responding now saying, go ahead, use my name. No. I'm picking on Tim. I don't know why I'm doing that. Yes, Lenice.
Tyler, one of the things that we talked about in discussing this report internally was the frequency of a filer for bankruptcy even owning a home to protect. And I think you had some information on that, or at least a sense from talking to people about how often it would be a homeowner versus a renter. And that may bear on the questions that y'all are posing here.
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers, but there were, I think it was around 60%. Around 60% of filers for bankruptcy were homeowners. It is a much larger percent, maybe even be a little larger than that. Were filing for bankruptcy versus renters. Is that what you were asking?
Part of the conversation was about Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13, and how often the homestead exemption would be brought up in either one of those situations, and how often the person would rather be a renter and would have no home, no equity issue to bring to the case.
I have information on the ratio between Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 and the reasons why people would choose either. Is that what you were asking? Or I can.
How often the exemption is declared?
Gotcha. I don't have that data in front of me right now. Yeah, I apologize.
It's a twofer. You'll be back tomorrow with the panel, so
yeah,
it's good. Yeah, it may not be what it first appears, so this will be interesting to see. Other questions for Mr. Carpenter? Anything else? All right. Well, the panel is here in the morning at 8:30 when we reconvene, and if you want to have some preliminary, you may, if there are any follow-up answers preliminarily, we'll be happy to recognize you in the morning before the panel. Thanks, Tyler. Good job. Go with where go. You don't have anything on your mind? Do you seek recognition? You wait till tomorrow? He's ready. Okay. Well, this is it's unusual that we'd finish within an hour, but it looks as though we have reached the end of today's agenda, and unless there's anything, I was dragging this out so McNally could be here. Mr. Chairman. Yeah. Was it a thing with the roads? Is there a problem with the roads? Or is there congestion? Or? I'm sorry. I'll get a better night's sleep and I'll behave tomorrow. Lanice, is there anything further for the good of the order? If there is nothing further for the good of the order, then we'll adjourn until tomorrow morning at 8:30. Thank you very much.